With us now, NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander, NBC News Senior Business Correspondent Christine Romans, and Maya McGuinness from the Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget. So, Christine, let's start with the tariffs that go into effect today. I guess they're already in effect, right? A 50% tariff on India. Bring us the details.
That is a big border tax. And remember, this is a Democratic ally. And what the president is doing, he's adding those reciprocal tariffs of 25%. He's adding another 25% tariff on because he says India is a big buyer of Russian oil. And that Russian oil is fueling Putin's war in Ukraine. The biggest buyer of Russian oil, by the way, happens to be China. The EU also buys some as well. But this is a big pain point for the Indian government and for anybody in the United States who's importing anything from India. We're talking about drugs, jeans, textiles, jewelry, and some electronics. Smartphones have been exempted from these extra big tariffs.
And so, Peter, India's prime minister is about to meet with President Xi in China for the first time since 2018. Is the White House concerned President Trump is just pushing India closer to China? And are there ongoing talks right now between India and the White House as far as trade goes?
Well, I think that's why this is raising a lot of eyebrows, obviously, because the president had a particularly close personal relationship with the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, for most of his first term, into the beginning of the second term as well. The Indian government assumed that they were going to benefit by that close relationship. And I think we're a bit stunned by how high these tariffs have now gone, up to 50% right now. You talk about it with Christine about the details and potential impact. This is wide-reaching. Consider India. About 2/3 of the largest American corporations have offshore operations in India right now. The president has never ruled out the potential for a better trade deal if the two sides are to come to any further agreement going forward right now. But I think the bottom line here is that the president's desire to work with an expanding India has always been preeminent in his mind, has viewed it as critical. There is some hope right now that the president, having just appointed a new ambassador to China who had been running the personnel office here, Sergio Gore, could actually help sort of restore this relationship. But at least for the moment, I think it does raise a lot of questions about how this gets resolved in a way that may better benefit both sides.
Maya, the administration keeps celebrating the revenue coming in from tariffs, about $110 billion this year, according to the Treasury Department. But is that money coming from American companies and consumers? And where is that money going? Will it ever get back into people's hands?
Yeah, so the upside, I suppose, of the tariff situation, which is certainly a game of tariff whiplash right now, where the uncertainty it's creating continues to complicate things in the economy. But the upside is it's generating very significant revenue. And again, to the uncertainty, we have no idea if that revenue will last. The tariffs may be found to be unconstitutional. The repercussions that come from other countries and how they respond, and if they change their own trading patterns, those all could change the trajectory we're on. But were we to stay collecting the same amount that we are right now, this could generate trillions of dollars over the coming decade to a cash-starved federal government. In particular, it could help to offset the huge loss of revenue we had from the tax cuts that were just passed. But yes, there's no getting around the fact that tariffs are taxes. They will come from companies, consumers. They will have effects on prices. As somebody who worries about the fiscal situation, I have to point out we are going to have to pay more for something because we're not paying enough for the government that we have. So this is one way to raise revenue. But the thing about tariffs to keep in mind is that it can have a positive fiscal effect, but also a negative economic effect and a questionable foreign policy effect, as you were just discussing. Are the point of tariffs to affect our relationship with China? Because they're alienating a lot of other countries around the world at the same time. So there are a lot of questions there about what the overall objective is.
So, Peter, let's talk also about Trump's pressure campaign against the Fed, sparking a planned lawsuit now over whether he can fire Fed member Lisa Cook. The Fed released a statement saying it will follow whatever the courts decide. What about President Trump? If the courts rule against him, will he back off?
Well, let's pull back the curtain a little bit, give you a better understanding how we got here. You have heard over the course of recent weeks and months the president's sort of repeated attacks on the Fed, specifically on the Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, who has been heavily critical of saying that he has waited too long to lower interest rates right now. The president has basically said that would spur the economy. It would help make housing costs a bit cheaper for Americans by lowering those rates. There are also many economists who warn that lowering interest rates could ultimately raise inflation, create higher inflation, which is part of the concern. But he's been going after Lisa Cook as part of an effort. In this case, he says it's because she is responsible for mortgage fraud, citing a criminal referral from the nation's top housing regulator, who is a Trump ally. She is now filing suit, saying her attorneys do that there is no authority for the president to do this, that this is an illegal action right now. At the end of the day, this is likely to be resolved again by the courts, and the president was asked if he would play by the rules of what the court determines, and here's what he said.
Oh, sure. Always. You always have legal fights. Look, I had a legal fight that went on for years with crooked people.
You abide by a court decision?
I abide by the court, yeah. I abide by the court.
The president, as you hear there, saying he will abide by the court. Democrats view this showdown with the Fed really as just an effort to distract from economic concerns right now. Most notably, though, the president is really, again, testing the limits of his power. And the Supreme Court has sided with him in terms of his ability to fire individuals at some independent agencies, including the National Labor Relations Board. But it has broadly protected the Fed's unique independence in the past. So on that, again, we wait to see, again, a 6-3 conservative court. How would they rule if this gets onto their desk?
Yeah, and the legal fight could end up being a long duration. We know how slow the wheels of justice sometimes turn. Christine, it's not just about politics here. Explain why this should matter to every American, this fight with the Fed.
The Federal Reserve is basically the shock absorber for the American economy. And it is over here, isolated. It's designed to be away from the whims and the short-term political pushes of elected officials. The people who are appointed on this board are appointed for very long terms. I mean, they'll span a couple of presidencies, and that's by design. And then there are regional Fed presidents who also come in and vote on a rotating basis. It's all designed to be like this so that it is impervious to a president saying, I want a majority on the board so you can lower interest rates when I want them lower because it'll make people feel good now. That's not what the Fed is supposed to do. It is a shock absorber for the economy. It's meant to make tough decisions outside of the political spotlight. So this is unheard of what's happening here right now. There has never been a president who has sought to remove a Fed governor ever.
Wow. And President Trump, he's been framing this as though if he gets one or two of his people in these Fed seats, it'll be a cure-all. Watch what he said yesterday about how he thinks his Fed policy would affect housing.
We'll have a majority very shortly, so that'll be great. Once we have a majority, housing is going to swing, and it's going to be great. People are paying too high an interest rate. That's the only problem with housing.
Maya, is it that simple?
This is such an important topic, and it does affect people's lives in many more ways than we really understand directly. But lower interest rates can be helpful in a multitude of ways in terms of helping the economy to grow more quickly and to make so many things more affordable, the things that you borrow from, whether it's mortgages for housing or credit cards. But the Fed cannot lower interest rates and change this dynamic on its own. The political pressure is a huge mistake that threatens the independence of this important institution. But even when the Fed does lower interest rates on its own, it deals with the short-term rates primarily, and that only works to affect things like the 10-year, which affect our mortgages, if we're directly affecting or changing the fundamentals that are pushing interest rates up. What I mean is the country is borrowing too much. We are borrowing trillions of dollars a year. That is causing interest rates to be higher. And there's no way to do an end run around that. The Fed is trying to properly control inflation, which is higher than it should be, and manage economic growth. But if it cuts rates too quickly, too much before we are ready to and when we're borrowing too much, that will push up inflation, which we saw a few years ago, and will harm families and households so much. The political pressure against the Fed right now and other independent institutions is incredibly destructive, and we have to find a way to protect these institutions from politics.
Christine, another telling moment during that marathon cabinet presser we saw with the president yesterday came from Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Let's watch that.
Your efforts on tax, trade, and deregulation have boosted paychecks for American workers while slowing the pace of inflation and lowering the cost of energy. Inflation has plummeted to just 1.9% since you took office.
he says inflation has plummeted, but as we showed in that little sneak peek that we gave earlier, that's not true at all, is it?
So that number that the Treasury Secretary is giving you there is the number that the president wants to hear. The president keeps saying that inflation is nothing, inflation is almost zero, inflation is beautiful. We know that inflation was rising more slowly in the earliest months of the Trump administration, but has picked up again over the last 3 months. I guess you can get to 1.9% if you slice it only. You don't measure inflation on, you annualize only the last 6 months. I mean, if you play with the statistics, you can get to that number. But the number that the markets care about, the number that the American families care about, is the number that they're feeling right now. And 2.7, a little more than 2.7% was the official inflation reading. Another thing that's been sort of frustrating more recently is that this administration tends to celebrate numbers that it likes and then test the credibility of the numbers it doesn't like. And that's something that goes to the same question about the Fed and its independence, kind of chipping away at kind of the norms that we all use to try to decide, how to govern and how to frankly gauge the economy.
Right, and how to determine what to do based on accepted truths and facts that it doesn't matter which party you belong to can look to as the truth, right? So anyway, it is incredibly important, and I appreciate all of you so much for being with us. Peter Alexander, Christine Romans, and Maya McGinnis. Thank you all.